If your D&D combat feels flat, predictable and boring, it might be because the monster manual set you up for failure. I mean, look at this. 2 claws and a bite. There's nothing here. It's not a monster that's going to be fun for your players to fight or fun for you to pilot. And it's going to take so much work for you as the GM to make it interesting. But we can fix it. Because hi, I'm Trek, I'm a game designer, and I want to share everything I've learned over the past few years of being ever so slightly obsessed with monster design. So I made you 100 D&D monsters in just 3 weeks that are actually fun, work for you instead of against you, don't require a PhD to run, and fix the 4 most common problems every GM has with D&D's monsters. Starting with the biggest one, which seems so obvious that it's crazy to me that the monster manual completely ignores it. I call it the A button problem, and it's the single most important thing to your players. Wait, why are we talking about players? I thought this was a video about monsters. Boo! And yet, that's exactly the problem. D&D monsters are not designed with your players in mind. Not really. If you look at a stat block like this, it is clearly concerned with conveying what, realistically, the monster should be able to do within the fiction. But what is D&D about, again? It's about players making decisions, right? So, does this give your players any decisions to make other than mashing the A button repeatedly until someone runs out of hit points? You could put in a ton of effort on your side, giving every single scenario side objectives, fun terrain, dramatic stakes, etc. But what if monsters were designed in a way where even if you chuck them in an empty white room, without context, without prep, they still encourage your players to adapt, to be creative, and to make meaningful decisions? Wouldn't that be nice? Unfortunately, it's impossible. Nobody has tried, but we're pretty sure it can't be done. Tough luck. Anyway, here's 4 ways to make monsters actually interactive. Because what good is it to talk about the 4 main problems with D&D's monsters if I don't give you solutions? And this is the solution to the A button problem. I call it having an interactive thing. Yeah, great name, I know. Wait until you hear the names I gave to my monsters. Anyway, here's the 4 solutions. Number 1. Vulnerabilities that the players can exploit. I'm not just talking about damage vulnerabilities here, but those are always a decent pick. You have a plant, make it vulnerable to fire, and watch as your players feel like geniuses for solving a puzzle that your 3-year-old cousin could probably solve too. But it could be weirder. This is the prisoner/jailer. Yeah, it has 2 names because this dragon is basically a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation. During the day, it's a good boy who might ask you for help to restrain it, because at night, he's bad. So bad. You know it. He. And so if you put him in sunlight at night, it has both personalities at once, and now it's kind of fighting itself. On its own turn, it's the night personality that wants to chomp your head. But when it takes legendary actions, it's the day personality that wants to help you. Number 2. Roleplay prompts. Wow, imagine that. Roleplay in our role-playing game. Groundbreaking, I know. The first one was something D&D does quite a bit, but this one, it's more something I steal from other games. Here's an example, the Amalgam Monster, which is what happens when you make the dumb mistake of running out of snacks during your dungeon crawl. Drink the Gorgon-flavored Kool-Aid and realize that you are, in fact, what you eat. Because it used to be a person before it decided hydras were keto-friendly, you can call to it as an action, use its old name, show it one of its old keepsakes that it used to care about, recount an important memory it used to hold dear. If you do that, it has to make a wisdom save or be very, very sad for a turn. Number 3. Conditions that the players can clear. And D&D actually has a bunch of those. Sometimes the slap is just a slap, sometimes you get grappled as a side effect, and now you have to wiggle out as an action. But again, we can get weird with it. There's a whole list of conditions in D&D, but by thinking outside the box, conditions could include any complication that puts your players in a bit of a pickle. Like, say your players are fighting an underwater creature that, every time it punches them, also punches 1 minute of air out of their lungs. The bubbles are floating around in the water, so if you think fast, you could get some breath back from them, or even use the bubbles to trade air with your friends. Unless, of course, you want to do it the old-fashioned way, by smooching the homies. Number 4. Player action options. What if, on your monster's stat block, there were actions that were not meant for you as a GM but for your players? Here's an example to show you what that can look like. This is Aldrich. He's a grumpy old man who used to be someone important, but we're not talking about him today. We're talking about Clayton, his really talented personal servant. And because Aldrich is just a tiny bit jealous of Clayton's talent, Clayton has to use some super shoddy equipment, like a wooden training sword, a half-broken bow, etc. And so, if the players are fighting Clayton, they can choose to target his equipment to try and break it, to give him some debuffs that last for the rest of the fight. Because D&D has gotten your players used to turning off their brains and mashing the A button, interacting with the interactive thing might not come naturally to them at first, at least until you've been doing it for a while. So when you first start introducing these interactive things, make sure you either call for insight checks or just give your players a couple hints. Or maybe a bunch of hints if your players are as smart as mine. So, now your monster is interactive. Everything is fixed, right? Well, not quite. There's another big problem which I like to call the single point of failure problem. problem. And I'm definitely not the only one who noticed it. D&D tried to fix it, and it backfired into becoming their worst good idea of all time. Here's the problem they noticed. Imagine you've been hyping up a demon boss for the past 3 sessions. It's the last battle, it's supposed to be epic, your players are looking forward to it. And you roll a 1 against banishment. And now your boss fight ends in the most anticlimactic way possible, with half of your players not even getting to take a single turn. And yeah, sure, part of the fun of TTRPGs is letting the dice decide what happens, but sometimes you can feel that your players wanted something more, and the dice are getting in the way of a good story instead of helping tell it. So here's how D&D tried to fix it. They introduced legendary resistances, and it backfired so bad that the video I made about it actually launched my entire YouTube career. So like your players have cool toys and 3 times per fight, you get to tell them, no, you. There's no flavor, no narrative, no interaction. It's the exact same trace that gets reused over and over again on more than 60% of monsters of challenge rating 15 or above. So now, to try and fix your players' toys being too powerful, you've just taken their toys away.
This is going to be fun, fun, fun.
So let's fix D&D's fix. And here, again, I have 4 types of things. I call them defensive things. Just like legendary resistances, they give you a cushion to ensure that a single bad roll doesn't end your encounter before it gets fun. But unlike legendary resistances, they still let your players do the cool things they can do with their toys. Number 1, passive threats. For this one, the idea is your boss gets stunned? Cool. Let it happen. Your player gets to feel good about themselves. Problem is, they're still taking damage because of something else, something that cannot be stunned. There is still a threat even if your boss is taking a little nap right now. For example, here's Our Lady Winter. She's especially dangerous to my subscribers because she wants to freeze all beautiful things, that way she can enjoy them forever. But she also has a lair action called, oh god, it's cold as balls here. So if you manage to stun her with your incredibly sharp jawline that you got when you click the like button, you're still taking cold damage every round. And as a note, anything that is not a solo enemy is kind of defaulting to having this as their defensive thing, because if one of them gets stunned, the other minions are picking up the slack. Number 2, multi-phase encounters. This is another one where if your boss gets stunned, you just stand there, unbothered, vibing, girl bossing, and just kind of let your players have their win. But the reason you're okay with this is that the encounter ending spell that just landed, it just ended one phase of the encounter, not the entire thing. And you've got an even scarier phase 2 loaded in the chamber, so that the moment your players start to feel a bit too safe, you can remind them they brought whole person to a meteor swarm fight. For example, this cheery little guy is called Assimilation, and he has a tendency to explode into a bunch of swarms of insects when you reduce him to 0 hit points for the first time. Which is insanely gross, but also now your players have a limited time to start dealing with those insects before they start flocking to each other to reform into the next phase. However many hit points the swarm of insects have when they regroup is however many hit points the next phase will have. Now, believe it or not, even with how horrible they were, these first 2 solutions were all about being nice to your players, letting their control spells work and then having a plan for when that happens. But now we're headed into maniacal laughter territory. Now, just like with legendary resistances, we get to tell our players, you don't get to use your toys. But we tell them in a way where somehow those fools convince themselves they're still having fun. For example, number 3, costly resistances. Imagine if, instead of saying you can do this 3 times per day, legendary resistances said you can choose to succeed on any save, any number of times per day, but every time you do, it costs you 30 hit points. Now, thanks to this little participation trophy, your players get to feel like they're actually contributing to their party. They made a power move, they forced the enemy to make a big sacrifice. But you can get pretty creative with the type of cost your monster has to pay, as long as it pays the cost your players actually care about. For example, this is Bergerette the Vast, a monster which answers a question I can't believe Pointy Hat hasn't asked yet: what if hag but big? If Bergerette fails a save she really doesn't want to fail, she can sacrifice one of her many heads to succeed instead. When she does, she goes from having 3 reactions per round to 2 and then 1 and then finally 0, which matters a whole lot to the rest of your party because she can normally spend those 3 reactions per round to halve the damage she takes from a hit. And then number 4, targetable resistances. Here, the thing that holds and enables the legendary resistances is not the boss, it's something else. Something you can punch in the face, like maybe a minion or a magical reliquary. As long as it stands, our boss succeeds on every save, but the moment your players realize this, they'll look at their party's barbarian and go,
"That's a surprise tool that can help us later."
For example, this is the Wardsmith, and it carries around a big old sphere of magic that seals something dangerous inside, like let's say the exact MacGuffin your players need to save the world. Because the sphere is so magical, it acts as permanent legendary resistances for the giant, until you shatter it. So now your players get to decide which one of those to punch in the face first. And as a bonus, this is a defensive thing, but since it introduces an element of target prioritization, it's also an interactive thing. Things can be multiple things at once. I really need to work on my naming schemes. Now, I have a free PDF with a whole menu of 20 legendary resistance alternatives, so you can spice up any 5e monster by giving it a defensive thing. And you can get it for free, link in the video description, but this is an old family recipe. Let's talk about the new things I've been cooking. Here's what's on the menu tonight, messieurs dames. The chef recommends for the main dish a 74-page PDF of 100 completely original monsters, of which I see you have already tasted a few, designed to engage your players, to be easy to run, smooth as honey, and just with the right amount of spice. Each of these was concocted using the same techniques explained in this video, and come with a side of plot hooks and evocative lore that can be plugged in any fantasy setting. And of course, as a garnish, beautiful human-made art. This dish is of course available to Patreon members at the Visionary tier or above, which, of course, as you well know as a regular client of our establishment, comes with the pièce de résistance. Everything that is already on Patreon, such as bonus videos, one-shot adventures, and homebrew content. And could I interest you in a free dessert as well, such as this spinning dungeon that's inside of a tornado, or perhaps an assortment of subclasses. So if you want this book, or you just want to support this channel so I can keep having excuses to pull out this accent, I will see you on Patreon. And bon appétit! Well, since you've just treated yourself to a nice dinner date with yourself, let's continue with a little more self-love. When's the last time you've done something for yourself, not just for your players? The first two parts were about focusing on your players' experience, making sure they could use their toys, but this one is about giving you something you can look forward to using in the same way that your fighter player looks forward to using their action surge. Because the last thing we want is to look at a stat block like this: multi-attack, claw twice, and then realize that's what you're gonna be doing every round for the next hour of your life. Because yeah, we could spend our energy trying to describe a boring attack in a non-boring way. That's always a possibility, and some of you might even enjoy the challenge. But what if we had attacks that were just not boring to begin with? To me, that is the difference between a stat block that makes me go, this is usable, and one that makes me actually hyped to run a game of D&D. So let's give our monsters a scary thing. And scary things come in 3 different flavors, which you can combine to create the perfect little ice cream of doom. Number 1 is rider effects. You can have a lot of fun as a GM by toying with what attacks can do beyond dealing damage. That's what a rider effect is. Like, which one of those would you rather use at your table? An attack that deals 3d8 plus 5 damage, cool but nothing unexpected, or an attack that deals 3d8 plus 5 damage and pushes the target 30 feet away? Oh yeah, now we're having fun. And there's a bunch of different things you can use as rider effects. Conditions, reducing the target's max hit points by the amount of damage taken, taking away a character's reaction, creating difficult terrain, etc. Here's an especially gruesome example from the book. Whenever this jolly good fellow deals poison damage, yellow boils appear all over your body. And then, when a creature who has those pustules takes piercing damage, the growths burst, and everyone within 15 feet takes poison damage, which infects more people. And so the cycle of life continues.
It's just nasty.
Number 2, gated moves. The idea here is to give your monster not just their basic attack, but also something else that's way more powerful and spectacular, but is gated behind something. It could be a limited resource, like how a lich can only cast power word demonetized once per day. It could be a cooldown, like how a dragon has a recharge on their fire breath. Or it could be a condition, like how the giant toad has a bite attack that grapples and then a swallow ability that can only be used against a grappled creature. Now there's something important to understand here. From a game design perspective, the purpose of these gated moves isn't necessary to make your players feel completely panicked, although that's a nice side effect, but more to introduce variety in the fight so that you, as the GM, don't have to describe the same claw attack 15 different times. Here's one example from the book, a little plant creature that's, and I want to be very clear about this, totally not a Pokemon. It slaps you with a vine whip that leeches a few hit points from you, but when it has healed a total of 21 hit points, it gets to use TM21, Solar Beam. Solar Discharge, which is a totally different move that won't get me sued, probably. Anyway, scary thing number 3, Doomsday Countdowns. Sometimes the promise of harm creates just as big of a reaction out of your players as the actual harm itself. So let's, together, you and me, promise a lot of harm to your players. The Doomsday Countdown can be very short term, like with shadows that reduce your strength by 1d4, and if it's reduced to 0, it's instant death. Or it could be long term, like with werewolves that give you a curse, and until that curse is removed, which could take multiple days if you're low level, if you get reduced to 0 hit points, you turn into a werewolf under the GM's control. But once again, we can get weirder. You've already seen this guy, but on top of having a pretty horrific multi-phase encounter mechanic, this one stat block also has 3 whole different flavors of Doomsday Countdowns to torture your players with. I might have cooked with this one. With its bonus action, it can puff some spores which give vulnerability to poison damage to those who breathe it in. But then if it reduces you to 0 hit points, which is way easier now that you're taking in twice as much poison damage, you instead temporarily become a servant. But then, if you're a servant, it can use a bonus action to start the process of assimilating you. If nobody stops it and you're still being absorbed by the start of this guy's next turn, congratulations, your character has been permanently promoted from being one of the boss's servants to being one of its organs. And with those, we have some very scary monsters that will get a pretty good reaction out of your players while actually being fun for us as GMs to run. However, so far we've only talked about the stat block, but a good monster doesn't stop at the stat block. If we go back to our old friend, the owlbear, it's got one last problem that makes it unusable for me. The fluff text talks about how it was made by a mage, but then spread out into the world and is now basically just a wild animal that lives in the forest. It's a magical monster, but it does not create magical stories, and if I'm playing or running D&D, I want it to be about magical stories. We've talked a bunch about how to make monsters mechanically interesting, but I think a good monster also makes my brain immediately fires with ideas, stories, and emotions I want to bring to my players. So how do you make a monster that can mean something in your player's journey? Hell, how do you make 100 of them? In 3 weeks. So the last thing your monster needs is an evocative thing, and to me there's 3 ways this can manifest. Number 1, plot hooks. A lot of monster descriptions will give you the monster's backstory, details about its appearance, maybe sometimes they will even repeat what is written on the stat block, but in prose instead of technical writing. And none of that really helps you prep a session of D&D. What I need is to be told ways this monster could become relevant to a party of adventurers. So ask yourself, what are the implications of this monster's existence? And then you keep pulling on that thread. Trust me, you'll end up somewhere interesting. This is how I ended up with murder fruits that were supposed to just be a silly little guy, but turned out to be way more. The basic premise was these are what happens when you grow tomatoes out of soil where someone was buried. But then I asked myself what happens if you eat them, and came up with the idea that their juice gives you visions from the memories of the person whose body they took nutrients from. And then I kept pulling and figured, okay, well, if that's a possibility, then maybe historians plant those on purpose on top of old battlefields to learn what happened. Or a grieving family might keep feeding one of those murder fruits to keep reliving the memories of their dead loved ones. And now the silly little guy holds more drama than the 5 pages you wrote for your first orphan tiefling's backstory. Number 2, stakes. What if, and hear me out here because I'm clearly the first person to ever have this idea, combat could be about something other than kill or be killed. Combat can be a vehicle to answer a lot of dramatic questions, like will you prevent the MacGuffin from being destroyed, or how long will it take you to run away? And as always, you could come up with those yourself. Or you could have monsters that make it easy for you. For example, this is the ink monster, and if the ink coming out of its back is spilled over some writing, the person who wrote the text forgets the information they wrote about. So if you have a fight involving this monster or an NPC who has put some of its ink inside of a bottle, it could very well end with you defeating the monster but still having the information you needed erased from someone's memory. Number 3. Dilemmas. Games are about making decisions, and sometimes a monster can introduce decisions that don't have anything to do with how do I spend my resources to deal as much damage as possible. For those of you who think this entire video so far has been blatant owlbear slender, I'll give the owlbear half a point here, because it almost gets this one right with how fighting an owlbear almost always results in you finding a baby owlbear to either adopt or kill. But it's still only just half a point, because an actual decision wouldn't have an objectively correct answer, which in this case is of course having baby owlbear for dinner. So I tried making a monster which might actually get your players to debate about what to do for more than 0.5 seconds, and this is what I came up with. Capitalism. I mean the sproutling. It's a plant creature that's also an extremely potent potion ingredient. We're talking more valuable by weight than diamonds. However, it also happens to look like this, to have an action called beg for help and a reaction called big sparkly eyes. Number 4. Now, you probably don't need to make 100 monsters, but the techniques I use to boost my creativity as someone for whom creativity is my day job, you can use to prep your weekly sessions. And there's really just two of these techniques. One, a pretty well-known phenomenon in brain science stuff, is that restrictions breed creativity. By adding some constraints, you prevent your brain from defaulting to your comfort zone. So the way I use this is that instead of starting from scratch, I looked for art and then asked myself, what is that? What does it do? What's its story? But you could also use random keywords, the lyrics of your favorite songs, or ask a friend to give you one-word prompts. Speaking of, the second technique I use to boost my creativity is pair writing, which involves forcing Val from Corkboards and Curiosity to put up with me for 3 hours per day as we work on my stuff. And in exchange, we work on Val's stuff the next day. Thanks to getting immediate feedback about your ideas, you completely avoid indecision paralysis. And on top of that, two brains together will always come up with something way better than either of them could have come up with individually. The result is always better than the sum of its parts. So what I'm saying is, go grab another GM and sign a pact in blood where you help one another with your homebrew or even your weekly session prep. And now, you know how to create monsters which won't result in boring, predictable, stale combat. And maybe, just maybe, you might have an idea for a rework of the owlbear that won't make me want to swallow bleach. As a reminder, you can get this 74-page chunker of a book on Patreon. It's available along with everything else I've ever put on Patreon for anyone at the $10 tier or above. This video and the monsters were written with the help of Val from Corkboards and Curiosity, as I mentioned earlier. So if you've made it this far, odds are you will also enjoy this video that I helped with, which breaks down how to create good villains. And super special thanks to my Patreon members at the $20 tier for making over-ambitious projects like these possible. Michael 3 Mod, Rafa, Salty Nick, Ebert, Binary Kitten, and Tai de Jong.